had a severe stuttering habit that was very debilitating. So the speech impediment was so severe, I was put into an evaluation for special education because they're going to take me out of the main school and put me into a class, which didn't feel like I belonged. So it was very, very difficult for me to meet ladies. The young ladies wanted to find, self-assured, sports athletes and it was far better for me to avoid eye contact than to have eye contact. So I stared at the ground and I found mushrooms. Okay, mycology, study of fungi. Fungi gave birth to animals. So fungi are not plants. They're in a separate kingdom. And mycelium is a fine cobweb network that grows in the ground, inside of trees and out of all plants. And it is everywhere, under every footstep that you take. So anyone who does not know what mycelium is, all you have to do is go outside, find a piece of wood that's been on the ground for a few months and tip it over. And you'll see this vast cobweb-like network growing underneath the log. The mycelium recycles organic material to create soil. So they're the interface organisms between life and death. We're all gonna die, all plants die, all animals die, and they then take these once living organisms and they disintegrate them and they reform soil ecosystems that give rebirth to life. So they're the interface organisms between life and death, but there are living membranes that are resident under every footstep that you take on the ground. These membranes, you're leaving impressions upon them. And so I believe mycelium is aware of our presence. And when we walk through the ecosystem, we are resonating, literally resonating upon these membranes of mycelial networks that are permeating all ecosystems. Well, there are different tipping points throughout history, and one of the tipping points is this book that I wrote. So that explains mycoremediation, and basically the mycelium is producing enzymes that are being secreted. These are digestive enzymes that break down wood, and they break carbon-hydrogen bonds, the same bonds that hold lignin and cellulose together. Also hold petroleum products together. And the mycelium then remanufactures them into fungal carbohydrates. Those are sugars. So the amazing thing about mycelium, it breaks down wood to make sugars. And the mycelium breaks down oil to make sugars. And so it breaks them down into elemental forms and then reforms them into new polymers, in this case, polysaccharides and carbohydrates. So the mycelium is just doing what it naturally does. But what's happening now around the world is that the loss of biodiversity is directly related to the loss of ecosystems. Ecosystems are dependent upon soil quality. Fungi create soil. They're the keystone species that can help us rejuvenate habitats, to make habitats reflourish. Fungi inhale oxygen, just like animals do. Fungi gave birth to animals. And so when we inhale oxygen that combines with hydrogen that has been liberated from the breaking down of wood, so H2O is formed, water. This is very cool because then the fungi create moisture banks within the soil. That benefits the plants. It also brings up the water tables. And then you create lenses of ever-expanding lenses of soil that are richer in moisture, richer in their carrying capacity to give life to species. And so fungi are deterministic. They're the keystone species that leads to habitat restoration and habitat health. So when I gave my TED talk, in 2008, and I talked about fungi sequestering carbon, Al Gore came up to me and said, Paul, you taught me something about global warming I didn't know. At that time in 2008, very few scientists, even climate scientists, understood the important role of fungi in being able to sequester carbon. So not only do fungi create richer soils, but it sequesters carbon into the ground. So the biggest carbon banks are resident within the fungal networks that are resident in the soil. It's basically ignorance. We call it mycophobia, the irrational fear of fungi. Even though Al Gore and his team were very smart, the science had not caught up to the field of mycology. I'm not a lone voice on this. There's a few of us mycologists who've been talking about this for decades. I think my book, Mycelium Run, I think my TED Talk has been viewed now by, I don't know, maybe more than 10 million people. I think that had a big stimulus in awakening people's minds to this. And before I gave my TED Talk, they warned me not to talk about magic mushrooms. They were so afraid of magic mushrooms that please don't talk about magic mushrooms. They talk about anything else, but don't talk about that. Now, TED is inviting me to talk about magic mushrooms. So it just shows you that very smart people who are very smart about many subjects can be very ignorant about mycology. I mean, there's lots of cultures around the world have been mycophilic, and it's largely due to the influence of Asian cultures and Japan, and China, and Korea look upon mushrooms as being rebirth, rejuvenation. And in English culture, in England in particular, they look at fungi as being decomposition, something that's fetid, something that is bad because it's dying and decomposing. And since the majority of Western medicine came out of England primarily, this has had a prejudicial influence on the beneficial role of fungi. Even to this day, the majority of medical schools, and I've talked to many medical doctors, there's not a single class on the benefits of fungi. It's all about fungi being pathogens. Now, we know that the discovery of penicillin, Alexander Fleming and then another group in Australia, but basically 1928, Alexander Fleming is given credit for discovery of penicillin, which inhibited a staph bacterium purely by accident. But it wasn't until 1942 that a researcher assistant by a woman by the name of Mary Hunt went to a market in Chicago and got a moldy cantaloupe. And that moldy cantaloupe had a strain of penicillium that was a super producer of penicillin, the antibiotic. Now, her moldy cantaloupe strain allowed for the industrialization of penicillin. The Germans and the Japanese did not have penicillin, and the Americans and the British did. So concerned were the British scientists that they would lose this special strain that they impregnated the collars of their shirts. So if the Nazis bombed the factories in England, they could recover the strain. So this speaks to mycodiversity, the diversity of fungi. Alexander's strain, as Fleming's strain of penicillium, could not be commercialized. It was weak. Mary Hunt's strain of penicillium was a super producer. There's a very good interview on NPR, National Public Radio, by historians who believe that the invention of penicillin, held by the British and the Americans, was a major factor in winning World War II, because you could cure soldiers from infections quickly or prevent infections. Whereas if someone had an infection, it takes a lot of infrastructure in a hospital to try to get that patient, healed. So penicillin has literally saved tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of lives. So we know penicillin is a powerful antibiotic from fungi. That was another big tipping point, looking at fungi as sources of antibiotics. So that was sort of the in conventional medicine and the explaining to doctors the usefulness of fungi is mostly about antibiotics from penicillium molds and other molds. When it came to mushrooms, they thought, oh, they're food, they have no medicinal properties. Well, that's academically naive. Why would you think mushrooms wouldn't have also some beneficial properties? It speaks to this prejudice again, and that really it's the use of mushrooms by indigenous peoples, by Eastern Europeans and Russians, and Asian cultures that a long history and familiarity with mushrooms to realize how important they are. So we have benefited from the fact that we have all these ethnicities now bringing their specialized knowledge of mushrooms into our common culture. So this is great. So we have a debt of gratitude to all these cultures around the world. The mushroom that I am very favorable towards right now is this mushroom. You can see it.
Wow.
This is a agarikon. Agarikon is a polypore mushroom. These are annual growth rings. This one's about 35 years of age. And that's very cute. It's got a little butt back here. This is kind of cute. It oftentimes has the form of humans. It was first described in Greece in 65 AD as Elixirium ad longum vitam, the elixir of long life. So for more than 2,000 years, the Materia Medica of Greece, this mushroom was first described by Dioscorides as being a very important mushroom for reducing inflammation. It only grows in the old growth forest, and very much it's on the threatened list of extinction in Europe because there's so few old growth forests. And this mushroom exists in sky islands in Austria, in Slovenia, and Italy in the Alps on larch trees, but very, very difficult to find in Western Europe now. That's why it's on the threatened list. It grows also in the Pacific Northwest, of North America, and indigenous First Peoples in the coastal regions of the Northwest, where I am now, also have a long time history of use of this mushroom. That's interesting. Is in Greek cultures and in First Nation cultures, on the other side of the planet, they independently, or maybe from the land bridge of migration, this knowledge goes back thousands of years, that knowledge migrated with human migration into the Americas. We don't know. But the fact is that in Chinese culture, this mushroom also was known as being a very, very important medicinal mushroom for reducing inflammation. Our research, my research for the BioShield Defense Program, if you see it's on my TED Talk, the mushroom that proved to be exceptionally active against pox viruses and flu viruses. And so we're still studying this mushroom. 1 out of 100 times in the old growth forest will I find this. We have about 80 strains of agarikon culture. So mycodiversity, like Mary Hunt. Mary Hunt's strain of penicillium led to a super strain. We're now literally on the hunt. Mary Hunt and on the hunt. We're on the hunt for a super strain of agarikon. And that's what we're very excited about, because we have lots of research focusing right now on using agarikon to address some of the most important issues that we face today. And so we're working with Harvard Medical School, numerous other universities. I have a patent already issued on this against bird flu. And we're very excited to continuing this research and finding the most powerful strains possible. But as the ecosystems shrink, as the old growth forests are cut, we're losing libraries of mycodiversity. Now think of that. If there was one forest that was not cut and it had a strain of agarikon that could save hundreds of millions of lives, which is more valuable, the hundreds of millions of lives or the timber board feet of lumber? It's that stark of a contrast. We need to save the libraries of knowledge. And it brings into focus the libraries of Alexandria, which have hundreds of thousands of tomes. And the libraries were burned several times in Alexandria, the largest collection of knowledge in the world, about 100, 200 years after the death of Christ. These libraries were burned. Several different groups came in and burned these libraries. Where would we be today if those libraries had not been burned? So the natural forests, the old growth forests, these ecosystems need to be protected because they're genomic libraries of fungi and other organisms that may prove to be very helpful in preventing future pandemics and could have solutions that we are so desperately in need of. I think I found a universal truth of nature, that the foundation of our health is intimately tied to the ecosystems, and fungi are the molecular bridges that influence and enhance our health. Without fungi, without mycodiversity, we are losing species in our potential toolkits, that if we lose these species, we won't have these tools for addressing the problems that we're increasingly facing. We need mycodiversity. We need Mary Hunt. We need the Mary Hunts of the world to find unique strains of fungi to protect the fungal genome for the benefit of us all. And my lifelong big work is to produce what's called a monograph of 100 strains of agarikon from all over the world. It's my most valuable possession is my library, my cultural library, and to do a monograph looking for a super strain of agarikon that can fight specific viruses, that can fight pox viruses, flu viruses, COVID viruses, or coronaviruses. We have this potential now with my library to save hundreds of millions of lives. You know, I want to go down in history like Mary Hunt and Alexander Fleming, you know, and open up the door so other people can follow. But our approach is using the complexity of natural products to enhance innate immunity. The decline in viruses is not due to a single molecule. It's due to this thing very much rooted in Asian philosophy of treating your system, so it can naturally upregulate the genes that then can counteract the damaging effect of viruses. So it's the Aikido approach to combating viruses. It's not the militaristic missile approach. It's the subtle Aikido approach of being able to enhance immunity by enhancing the entire system of readiness. Does that make sense?